why they went.
They went where?
They all as a group, all the guys went to the front
Oh,
banging, and as they killed them, they just kept coming and coming and coming.
Claire's single.
And then they
The granddaughter
plane went down.
single.
Yeah.
The one that's
Your daughter.
my daughter had a boy
But
and
at
a
least
girl.
it wasn't.
crashed, yeah.
Yeah,
They crashed into something.
that's right.
And we have a book up in our library about this. And they were saying too, like how people just
That was a big flash.
people got stuck like in
Julian
stairwells.
Stephen,
Nothing
Ross,
to go up.
Lars, that was a big flash. For a lead, they're high lead.
Some people jumped just because they didn't want to go down.
And that must have been hard for the people on the ground. Seeing people jump out of the building that were landing right next to them.
But they still had
They said it was just
four grade
there was nothing up to the bodies.
social
After you fall for 100 floors, you got quite a speed. Get cement or something.
It was 82 floors. That's a
A lot different than the way the kids go today.
well, I guess they came. I was in
They take an airplane and they stay in hotels.
in the 75th or something. So the people above that had
Maybe
nothing.
harder than fun of that.
And the real reason
Seeing a
the
mash
building
tent,
was made different.
going on the bus,
And they tried a new
being
type
able to
of
put on clean
architecture
socks after
where
3
a lot
days.
of straight up and downs.
Because they had to
If they'd
ration.
made it the old way, it wouldn't have collapsed like that. So I don't know if they'll ever do that again. I know.
I'm not a fan of heights.
I know.
3 is enough for me. I know. I look at some of these high rises too, and I go, oh man. A lot of them have balconies now. It's like.
Yeah, that would be scary. Probably something stupid would fall off.
Who are you talking about? The subway?
Living in high areas, like New York. Got all those high buildings.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they need it.
Dave? Where does he work? At the U or a company?
He's retired.
Oh,
He was with a firm, and he mainly did work
company.
on hospitals. Was what he did as an architect.
Yeah.
You could ask him. I don't
But
really know.
he'll tell us maybe.
Are you in that?
Well, here we go. Welcome to Aging Splendidly. Those of you who are joining us live and those who are, both of you that are watching online. And thanks for everybody coming. It's good to see all of you. Couple of brief announcements, even though I'm not a tax attorney. First is that part of this meal is paid for by Thrivent, and that's because I have a small life insurance policy with Thrivent, and so I'm entitled to two $250 grants per year. So if you have a Thrivent policy, you need to contact Thrivent. I'd be happy to help you. This is to help Thrivent in its tax status. So we're providing a tax dodge for Thrivent. It's the American way. Second tax
Can we donate our portion to aging?
I'll get back to you. So, second announcement. For those of you who have an IRA and are over age 73 at this point, it's called QCD, Qualified Charitable Deduction. So you can work with your IRA, have them cut a check to a qualified charity, and donate it with pre-tax dollars, which is now important because everybody gets a $15,000, or if you're married, $30,000 tax deduction. So until you go over that threshold, you're not able to use pre-tax dollars except for this QCD. So if any of you have questions about it, contact, me. So, no further announcements other than we have another TED Talk today. This is his third appearance. First appearance was more than a few months ago about Summit Avenue, and a few months, years after that, it was about the state capitol, and today he's going to talk to us about Selby Avenue. Ted Lentz.
Okay, we're on? Good. Wow. I haven't had such high technology ever. So this is really terrific. Thank you for coming today, and I'm hoping this will keep you entertained and informed. This talk began with me working with I'm an architect, but I stepped away from trying to get registered at a point when our community was falling apart. It felt. We had a home on Summit Avenue, but we were stunned when we realized, I was thrilled because after years of beating a drum about historic preservation, our taxes began to drop each year. And I was thrilled. I mentioned this to a friend in downtown St. Paul, and he said, "You're such a dummy. Your taxes are going down because your house value is dropping." I said, "No, it can't be." "Yeah, it is." So a month later, a house that sold for the same price, very much like ours, a half block away, sold for $5,000 less than they had paid 4 years earlier. So I thought, well, yeah, maybe. So I became active in neighborhood association work, and one thing led to the other, and I found myself, so we got a few books underway, and I have brought some. I'll show you those. They're shown on the slides. But in the midst of that, I found myself in a series of meetings where we realized this was after we had become a National Historic District. And at the time, we were the largest National Historic District in the United States. And a little aside note, 25 years later, I was meeting with the federal agency at a convention meeting of historic preservationists. And I said, 25 years ago, we got this note that ours was the largest National Historic District. What's our rank now? And there were about 4 guys sitting behind the table answering people's questions, and they pulled together and they powwowed and they put out some notes, and they said, yeah, okay, you're number 1 in size. I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No, when the Historic Hill District was formed, what you needed was a certain number, I don't know, it was even a majority of the homeowners but you needed to have blocks, the numbers that were submitted. And this is that area closer to the cathedral, you know, on Summit Avenue and a few blocks north, and some of these older houses, historic properties. Well, that was when we were designated. 2 years later, they changed the law, and in order for any residential district to become a National Historic District, 100% of the homeowners need to sign off. So the standard size now is about a city block, and we were a mile by, or whatever, quite big. So that was the background, and we had raised funds, and we were doing work. I was chaired an architecture committee, and when we got funds from a foundation to do work, I quit my day job. Anyway, quit the day job and started doing community, meeting with people that were all sorts of different problems, a lot of them dealing with architecture and planning and the rest of that. So I worked on 7 different neighborhood associations. I would attend meeting and pump the water. And in the midst of that, I kept realizing the following. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So Selby Avenue kept recurring because people would say, just wait, let's not talk about it. No one will know. This is in 1975 now, 76. And so what I did is, was convinced, this is all part of the backstory, that with a building like this anchoring your street, it can't be all bad. Well, it was. And bankers refused to invest on Selby. And so as buildings, thank you. As buildings were vacated, they often had no buyers. And then sometimes it would catch a fire and they'd be torn down, et cetera. So it was a lot of disinvestment. And yet north and south of Selby were buildings that were doing well. And so we set out and got a fund from National Endowment for the Arts to study that street and see if there's some way of describing it, helping maybe change the arc of non-development. And so we're starting really with these slides are 6 months old. And so this is what it looks like. And I think many of you do go up and down Selby. There are people that I have met who still refuse to go down Selby because it's not safe. But it's more safe. Okay. Anyway, so this is Selby. This is the W.A. Frost and the Blair House beyond. And okay, that worked too. And the restaurant, the malt shop at one point, and it has other names now. We'll go talk about that some more, as well as Mississippi Market. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I would bet there's a lot of people here who do occasionally shop on Selby. The fact is, unlike what it was in 1975, where the minute anywhere in St. Paul, if you'd mentioned Selby Avenue, I could see it in people's faces. They felt like they were entering the Dante's Inferno story about ye who enter abandon all hope. Remember that? That's that wrought iron sign that helped you as you walked into Hades. But Selby Avenue businesses have really perked up. There's a lot of businesses. There's a lot of the older houses have been restored. A lot of the newer houses going up. There's 8 or 9 brand new, larger apartment buildings and or condominiums going up. This is just down the street from Selby and Dale. And another one, which we're going to see again because there's some great stories related to this. This is another building. So I talked about this whole issue of living in an historic district that no one knew about. People that lived in St. Paul did, but they, so we ended up, and this report was done in 1975, and it led to a lot of an excited investment in the historic Hill District of St. Paul, which is that area south of the freeway and north. That's where it relates relative to that. But this is what we designated as the historic district. Again, in the U.S., most historic districts now are a loose definition, but what you have is 2 or 3 blocks of National Historic District. So we ended up having a large swath of this was that National Historic District. But this ended up being a very large area, which meant you had more room for discussion. It included the 225 city blocks, 4,000 structures, over 36,000 residents. If it were a separate city, it would be number 28 in the state of Minnesota. So, and that was before more people began moving back in. So in 1970s, the shift had occurred. By 1975, things were moving. And so the Historic Hill District, largest in the nation, neighborhood preservations, we were broken up into, as I said, 7 separate groups, some overlapping, but others, and they were really interested in what can we do to make our neighborhood great, make it safe, do other things. There was committees formed to improve schooling, and the Webster School was an outproduct of that, et cetera. And at that point, by the mid-70s, private home values were increasing from 20 to 30% per year. The neighborhood associations were great. That first magnet elementary school in the Twin Cities was opened, and we had a very strong, active neighborhood crime watch. And the anchor for much of the historic preservation, because Dave Clavin and his wife lived right below the S on the Summit Avenue, lived on Summit, and once the people knew that, it just changed the art. The Summit Avenue, I know, you know him, so you think it would decrease the value. It didn't. No, it actually was, and Summit became the anchor. And so we ended up, almost immediately, this area to the south of Summit really picked up, and around the cathedral began to really change. But there was, and as it grew, businesses on Grand Avenue, which were sort of okay, little bit of mom and pop stuff, but that really began to take off, and that also helped anchor it. At the same time, again, we're talking 1975, is when I applied to the National Endowment for the Arts for a grant. Because what we had, every meeting I had, almost every community meeting, people said, don't talk about Selby Avenue. If you're anywhere outside the city, even in the city, don't mention it. Maybe people won't know. And I said, well, we can't do that. Anyway, the point was there were enough businesses, there were enough problems there that if we talk about increases in prices, and prices here were beginning to go up, but at a much slower rate, and we ended up, these are the stories. It was dangerous. In fact, Selby Dale was considered the single most dangerous intersection in all of St. Paul. Are any of you still frightened by that corner? You shouldn't be, but we'll talk more about that. So it was also the site, the riots after Martin Luther King's death. People came down Selby. There were multiple abandoned buildings, and after being abandoned, they turned into vacant lots. There were some assets that we knew about, and we needed to find ways to exploit them. There were buildings that were vacant, could potentially become something. We had some active businesses. Everything in that photograph, this side of the cathedral, it's gone now, but we had as an asset the Summit University Planning Council, which had access to city support, city funding. The big burden there was the Selby-Dale intersection, 1975. 2 of the 3 corners were vacant. They had been the site of difficulties. So the story I'm talking to you now about of the historic preservation thing was a story that we used as a background. We called a meeting and got a hold of all the different neighborhood associations, and that very first meeting had about 200 people show up, say, yeah, we'd like to see if we could do something about Selby Avenue. And it was on that basis that I wrote a proposal to the National Endowment for the Arts. 25 years later, talking to the board, this is the Old Town Restorations Board, one of their board members said, did you know that you lost the vote? They did not want, I had approached the board and asked if I could apply for this grant. And the board had a rough discussion and said, nope, Nope, that's not what we do. We buy and restore buildings and show people how it's done. Except there were two holdouts. And they held out and said, no, this is something we really think should happen, and there's people talking about it. I think it's a good idea. And more importantly, he's applying for a grant for the National Endowment for the Arts. And there's a 1 in 4 chance that he would get it normally, but it's Ted writing it, and makes it about a 1 in 10 chance. So the money will never come. And so anyway, so we had these, okay, we'll do it. So we had this meeting, and there was a lot more interest than anyone anticipated in doing it. And as we got into it, what turned out to realize is in a room like this, of this age, your age, and we would have community meetings, and about half the people would be 60, 70, or 80, and the other half would be younger. But most of them would say, oh, I remember when Selby was, and in 1975, if you were 80 years old, the Selby Avenue was not the Selby Avenue that the person who was 60 years old found, or others. And so we very quickly began realizing a lot of the enthusiasm by the community was to go back to what they had, or at least be reminded of it, which was really gave us a great chance to build. And I was looking at writing reports and thinking we would be showing people designs of what you could do with the streets. So it quickly devolved into 2 separate books, Selby Avenue, Status of the Street, and Selby Avenue, Future of the Street, both about 50, 60 pages. But the status of the street was where we started, because we wanted to talk about what it was like. If you were 70 years old in that meeting, at Christmas time, you went to see Santa at the department store at the corner of Selby and Dale. 4-story building, anything you want, Christmas trees, other things, etc. It was a burgeoning street, and it was a very popular, such a strong street, 1880 to 1900, that in one of the very first streetcars was a one-man, one-horse bobtail car that left from downtown and came up Selby. But it would leave downtown and walk straight up toward where the state capitol is now, and then walk back because of the slope. It was so popular that the very first cable car, only cable car ever in the Twin Cities, was built, and the steam house to run the cable car was on the intersection of Selby and Dale. And so they brought this up because it had this incredible incline. If you are at the cathedral and you walk across the street and you look out, you'll see the slope that they ran these tracks up. And that lasted actually for over 10 years, about 13 years, was the use of that cable car. No windows, of course, but it worked pretty well, good steam engine. But and that was replaced shortly by the tunnel that was come through, and then they used the electric line overhead. So again, some of you remember streetcars in the Twin Cities. Some of you may remember being able to go anywhere in the Twin Cities for whatever it was, a nickel or a dime, because you would take a streetcar. What?
A token. You had to buy tokens.
Tokens. Okay. Yes. Okay. So for a token. Anyway, so it was an interesting time. So, but at that time, then Selby, by 1900, 1920, really did get developed. These are the upper line here are the shapes of the buildings. The larger ones, of course, are commercial or apartment buildings. Then in 1920 to 1939, a lot of the original housing that was built was replaced by commerce. You'll see the names of some of the businesses along the dressmaker, beauty parlor, flower store, bakeries. There were what didn't show up at that time, but were existing when I first lived a block off of Selby, down by Farrington, were mom and pop groceries every 2 blocks, because that's where the trolley stopped. And everybody, you could get off the train, you'd pick up a loaf of bread, eggs, milk, whatever you needed, and walk home. So that was still business. In the time, over the next 5 years, most of the ones that I shopped at that time closed. When I talked to the owners, they liked, I was a young college-age kid at the time, and I would talk to the owners and I'd say, oh, you know, the kids want us to sell the business and move in to Highland with them, move down the block. And so we're going to, and that's where our temple is now. So that's where we're going to go. So that sort of thing. And that was the type. And so then things change. 1940s, still active with business. This is just an advertisement for a Latin American studio, which is to teach Latin American dance, as opposed to the other dances you might want to follow. And this is, you know, the look of it, and this is a bus. The streetcars disappeared, buses go in, different businesses go on, and the neighborhood, of course, changes. And then, of course, the interstate goes through, and a lot more things change. However, what we find is that, I just wanted to show, again, this is our first book, and it was called The Status of the Street. And one of the things that just shocked people was this page, where I said, given these 5 census tracts, a nice way to divide up the city, Selby runs right down the center of those 5, what's the family income based on that? Well, it was, terribly depressing. Those 5 census tracts that year, 1970 census, was only $33 million. Well, there's nobody that could spend money on Selby. No, they weren't shopping on Selby because there was nothing to shop there. But this was in our first book. This was to say, what's the status of the street? And in fact, one of the other things that helped was to go back, and again, this is me telling the board that I'm going to meet with the people in the department, the Minnesota Department of Corrections had 2 statisticians that worked on University Avenue, and they would aggregate data from all over the state. And so I made an appointment, and I went to visit these young college-age people, both demographers, I guess was the title, and I explained I wanted the statistics on Selby, and both of them said, Selby Dale? We'd never go there. And I go, well, no, it's not really, no. And they're the people aggregating crime, but they gave me the statistics. And of course, in 1969, there were 16,000 what were called social, class 1 issues of assault, murder, whatever. There were, serious stuff. But it turned out that by 1977, when my last statistics, as you can see, had dropped substantially. In fact, when I went ahead and did the math on it, it was not a safe intersection. The crime rate per capita on Selby and Dale was just as high as downtown St. Paul, downtown Minneapolis, and downtown White Bear Lake. So, again, you put that on a piece of paper, but it can't be true. Well, yeah, please, here, go check the stat yourself. It was true. Why? Well, for various reasons. In terms of population, that was just the way it was. So what we were trying to do in that report, and I realized I brought them as show and tell, and what's the value of having show and tell if you don't show or tell? So this is the telling part. So we published this book and get it out, and a few months later I published the one you're about to see. So this is just to say, look, this is the status of the street. First, a history. Hey, it used to be a strong street. It used to be a very popular and exciting commercial street. And there are still people who remember that, and they'd love to see it again. There's energy in that direction. And as you just saw, there's 35 million, 33 million in income around there. People are looking for a place, if they could do it, and shop there. So that's what this book 1 was set out to do. But then book 2, and what we're about to talk about, is the future of the street. Okay, well, what do we do? Well, one of the things is, and now the Green Book, you may be shocked to know this, but over the next year, as I worked with developers, we went to visit with bankers, and we take both books, the blue book you're about to see was not really what they were interested in. They liked the other parts. But we're going to talk about this. This is the future of Selby Avenue. And of course, start with a look at the physical setting and what can be done. And instead of getting mired in trying to fix up older buildings, we could do that, and some really were worth it, but rather also what was the value of the streetscape? What could the look be like? What could the street landscape look like? What's the physical, looking about physical setting. This was just a study. There were people that were wringing their hands about this, getting city street lights. What could they be like? And the answer was, for the money that is being proposed, there's quite a few options that could come forward. Also, planting along the street, making things work. And so, again, trying to place ideas and images that say it does not always have to look this way. So this was a sketch of what Dale Street would look like 5 years hence. And so it starts by saying this is the existing Dale Street right now. This is aerial view, drawing. Vacant here, the very corner is vacant, and then there are other vacant lots along there. There was an opportunity for things to be improved. This was a little, like the old 7-Eleven, but like a rundown 1950s version of it, etc. So there were those sorts of things happening there. And so what we did a quick sketch that said these are some of the things you could keep, the existing building, but you could put plantings in and you could build things. And possibly, since this building was vacant, the corner was vacant, but the next building in was there but vacant, we could do something that took advantage of the heavy traffic in the neighborhood, have vehicles and the rest. And in fact, within 5 years, that entire, let me go back a sec, this entire block, and the photograph, I think that is the cross, yes, that is the cross street, that's St. Albans there. This entire block and half of this, or a third of the block on that side, were acquired by Catholic housing group, just blanking, I'm trying to think of the man's name. Was that? Catholic Church, they had a separate, Joe Arago was the gentleman's name, that was buildings and housing. So they took that and they built that, and this is what it looked like then in 1980. And this is a photograph taken a month ago. So, or last spring, I guess, because it's much greener now. Anyway, last summer. Because, in fact, they built housing. Didn't try and reintroduce commerce except on the very corner, the first building. And so this was an idea. And of course, across the street, they cleared that and put in this is the northeast corner of Selby and Dale, put in this multi-use building, including the Louisiana Cafe, which was very popular at that point. And this was just a sketch of if that evolved, what could happen. But in fact, right around that time, shortly thereafter, up goes this building, the Mississippi Market, the co-op. And suddenly the dynamics change. You have a co-op that has good parking, has a lot of food, and a large volunteer staff coming in to make things go and flow. And more people learn that it's not as dangerous. And this was the end of that. The end of that book we had roughly every 20 years said this is what it would look like. So this is what it should be looking like this year. Little shy of that, but in fact, it's okay. What we're trying to do is tell stories of what it can be in the future. This, incidentally, was one student that had worked with us, Richard Wolfgram. I don't know if any of you know Richard, lived in the neighborhood. Richard did his senior architectural thesis, and this is his drawing of the intersection. This is Dale Street, that's Selby, and he took all that property, and this was a year before Catholic Charities, or whichever their housing group was, built it there. So he had something, that was what he proposed, and this is what it looks like right now. This is actually, and again, these buildings are almost are 40 years old or so. And they're well maintained. They've provided housing, a lot of good services for that community. So we have other things happening. This is the other part. Selby Dale was always the big bugbear. You know, ye who enter abandon all hope, that was guaranteed. We had finished the studies when the American Institute of Architects had their annual meeting here in the Twin Cities. And so I had some professors from Philadelphia show up, and I had gotten to know more. And so I said, well, let me give you a tour of the city. And this was it'd be about 1970. It was a little before, you know, I got these dates right. Let's say it's 1980. It was after the studies were done, but before much had happened. Now, these were people from Philadelphia, but at that point, they had been working in cities. Other cities had done nationally recognized projects. So I have a car with 4 people, and I'm driving them through up Dale Street till we're about to cross Selby Avenue. And I say, oh, lock your doors. This is a dangerous spot. Lock your doors. Click, click, click. And so the light changes, and I slowly go through. And as one voice, they said, stop the car. Stop the car. We need to get out. So we got out of the car, parked the car. We got out and walked all around it. And what they said was, this is better than 90% of Philadelphia. And so then, of course, I had the books, so I could show them the stats. And they go, really? And you're having a hard trouble? You know, you're having trouble selling? It's changing. It's getting better. But they were stunned at how safe it felt, etc. So that was an East Coaster's perspective. But the other thing that we did in this book was took some of the old houses, old buildings, and I had shown you the photograph of this, which was formerly a fire station. It was gutted and rebuilt. It was a gas station and then vacated, I think 10 or 20 years before, in the mid-1960s. No one could do anything with it. And just as part of this drawing, we had one of the students say, I know we could do something with it because it still has that tower. We could do, or they could build that. So they go ahead and say they do that drawing, and that gets widely published. And a fellow young man in Minneapolis who had started a place called the Malt Shop in Minneapolis. It was very popular, and boy, and he was looking for a place in St. Paul, and he sees this building, and he finds that can really afford that. So he goes in and he pulls together with his own money and with an investor's money. He gets it ready. He has architect drawings on it, and they're ready to build their second malt shop. And they're a few dollars, whether it was $10,000 or $20,000 low. And that was okay because they thought they would go out and get a bank, but the banks they talked to initially said, but Selby Avenue, are you kidding? So because he was looking at our drawings, he calls me and we said, well, we ended up, so I go with them to meet with the banker. And here's a successful businessman who's raised 80% of the money you need. Yeah, but it's not far from Selby Dale, says the banker. Yeah, but given one, a track record, two, you're looking at 10% roughly of the cost, the investment cost, and you're number one on the payback list. That's part one. But more importantly, you're a community bank and you've been actively marketing how you look out for the community. Here is a low-risk way to put a note in your annual report, put it page 1, what you're doing. So anyway, that loan came through. I don't know if they put it on page 1, but that loan did come through from them. They went ahead and built this. It was wildly successful. All debts were paid off. I think it's on its 3rd owner now, but it's always been a fairly successful business. Things like that were happening. The city housing authority, Housing and Redevelopment Authority in the city of St. Paul had acquired vacant lots and also some older buildings that were in disrepair in this area, and they pulled together and had a contractor, developer come in, and he put together this. Was one of the buildings. What you see in the foreground is one of the buildings. Around the corner is an image of one of the other existing buildings on that corner in Farrington and Selby. This is one of my favorite little funny stories. So this is again, we're talking now roughly 1980. Now, let's make it 1990. It's later. It's quite a while. The pastor, Carl Walker, and I had known one another. We both were active in other community efforts, and Carl had gotten together with other people who were west in the blocks west of Dale, actually mostly at thank you, Victoria. Thank you, sweetie. At Victoria and West. But what he had was his church was in a VFW post that was a one-story concrete block building, about 30 feet by 30 feet, one story, had a full basement. And he and his church, a singing church, evangelical group, had that. And so he called me and said, we've been thinking about, we've got to do something. We need to repair. The bathrooms were in very bad shape, etc. And I had worked with another church a few blocks away with another friend. And so I went together with him and I looked at this and had the plan. And I don't know if you ever thought about the question of how you would restore a 20 by 20, maybe it was 28 by 28 concrete block building and make it larger and better. Well, as I got there, and I said, well, who owns the lots next door? There were 10 lots heading east. Oh, they're ours. Have we got an idea? Anyway, so the upshot of it was, and it began there. We did some sketches. I had talked with people at the city what was possible, and basically gave him the material, and he went shopping for investor developers. And basically, the investment package for this developer they ended up working with, it was terrific because they had the equivalent of some immense number, $700,000 in land, or the equivalent, I don't know what the appraisal ended up being, and that gave them the down, that they had raised some other money, but then they took out a loan to do the building. I think the next one will show you. Yeah, this is the full building. And in exchange, Carl just got a corner. So his church is 4 times the size of what it was. He has less parking space. He no longer has, 7 city blocks. But this building is, and that was part of his being, Carl Walker being part of it. The building went up as a seniors community, and I don't know how exactly it's structured, but everyone is designed for independent living, but built into the building is the potential for any support seniors need. So there are, and I don't have the details on what spaces they have, but they have a steady influx of people who are medical practitioners, who do physical therapy, who do dementia support or whatever. And the building is set for that. So it's been very successful in that regard. Plus, Carl's church really is a dynamite thing. In addition to that, other things happening along Selby. And I had known the people that had Carlson Frank Architects had bought the building there. He was Sylvia Frank, Peter Carlson had been active students with writing these reports. And Peter especially was an irksome student because he was older than me, but still a student. Anyway, but no, great person. And one thing was, they end up buying up a lot and building a couple blocks from here, and then buy a building that had needed to be removed. It was, seriously structural damage or something. So they built 2 commercial buildings and put them there, and that was where they had their practice, and they had rented the space. But then Great Harvest Bread Company moved off of Grand onto Selby Avenue. My goodness, what a jump that was. Great Harvest, the best bread in the Twin Cities. And you're going, where? There were still a lot of people that was their feeling. Yeah, Selby, my goodness. Why should I be there? Well, she moved. And guess what? The bread was just as good. And people parked there and they were safe. Nobody was mugged. And the across the street building is gutted and turned into a restaurant that becomes wildly popular, et cetera, et cetera. So there was that. We have now, one of my favorite sites is Selby and Victoria, because it was on Victoria that I had worked on that other church, and et cetera, and they're building, they're taking care of things. But so this is, these are some of the things that are happening down at the intersection. The coffee shop near Milton. Walker West was built right on Selby and became incredibly successful, still is, and has moved 1 block north onto Marshall, I believe it is, just off of Dale Street. But so was the study successful? Well, one thing I felt one of the important things they could do is provide data and just reduce anxiety. And especially if you can get a banker or two interested and accepting that it leads, then show that conversion in, say, Selby was reasonable. The crime concerns, the minute the facts were documented, now St. Paul Police and others had a lot to do with improving the quality of the neighborhood. But the fact was things were changing, and it was no longer struck. The pathways of the future were encouraging. Writing the reports, putting them out there, distributing them broadly, reassured residents, investors about this, about the change, but that it might be slower as commercial property especially than it is for single family homes that you buy and you do 80% of the investment is the muscle of the wife and husband who have purchased the building, and usually, anyway. And then also, by doing that, it helped bring some of the public options, like the Catholic Church, seeing these documents. That was what led to them forming that anchor on Selby and Dale and changing things. And has it changed? Well, this for me is the final shot. This is the bakery, whose name? Mark Hugh. Mark Hugh's Bakery at the intersection of Selby and Dale. And if you go there on a Sunday at 10 o'clock, you will, if you arrive at 10 o'clock, you will typically be the 10th, 12th, 15th person in line waiting to buy a $5 to $10 donut. And they close the building, they close the bakery when they sell out. And some days they're closed at noon. They're supposed to be open until 3, etc. So that's a difference. That's changed. And another thing that's changed recently is I know there are those of you that would love to see us return to the horse-drawn carriage. And I can understand that. Or even a cable car might be fun. But in fact, the history of the trolleys, there you can see 3 versions of the electric trolleys on Selby were big part of its life and success until trolleys and tracks in the middle of the road got to be bothersome. And then the buses took over, and that was okay. But what's happened in the last year is they now have a public bus every 15 minutes. 24, I think it's 24/7. It was. They may shut off or be less frequent later at night, but you can get on and off the bus from Lake Street in Minneapolis, comes all the way through Lake Street, comes over the bridge, down Marshall till Snelling. At Snelling goes south a block and then heads up Selby. And it's pretty remarkable to see that. So there's that. Let's see. I think that we should. And there we are. That's the end of this. This is the one I want you to see. If you don't want a donut, you can buy a flan for $70 or a vanilla Saint Honoré for $60. But I would recommend, just a simple $10 to $15 donut is what you should look forward to. So, I think we can, I'll leave this up for now. Oh, heck, let's just go back to something that's fun to look at. And we'll leave it up. Okay. That. Well, anyway, so this is, there we go. Let's look at the picture. There we go. What we had done, both books had 3 drawings, and the drawings extended on the face. Here, this is the future. What we did. Again, one of the great things I had, how did I match the federal grant? Well, student value. Students, a lot of them work, some got paid, and some are doing it for classwork. But this is a 6 foot long, all 3 of these are 6 foot long drawings that go from Dale Street down center, beg your pardon, Western. I'll get this right. Here's Western here. But just showing the evolution, proposed evolution. The first book, Status of the Street, talked about Selby Avenue from Western here, there, off to the next cross street, and how it had evolved from the 1800s to 1975. And the next book started and did the drawings of the future. And it actually begins with 1980, because there were a few changes, but then it goes out 20 years at a time. Just to encourage people to imagine and dream. So there. Any questions? How about that? Didn't talk an hour. Yet. How about a question or two?
You mentioned something about the tunnel and the
Sure.
cars going through the tunnel, and maybe when it was cut off.
Yeah. I don't have the exact date cut off. Let me show a drawing. I think I can find it easily. It was one of my favorite. Oh, yes, the question is tunnel. Tell me tunnel stories. And I'm not certain exactly when it was. It would have been, well, we can go back to that slide of the.
No, just tell me.
Just talk about it, Ted. Yes, okay.
Still there, or is it gone?
It is still there. There is still there. However, it is sealed, and I hope it's sealed better than it had been. But, all right, let's see if we can find it.
Selby was definitely a diverse street.
Yeah, it had that.
I remember an ice house on Selby.
Uh-huh.
I remember,
Citizens. It was called Citizens Ice.
Really?
and I remember a cookie factory on Selby.
Dad's Cookies on Chatsworth. And the Selbyville Wreck, where I learned the fine art of shooting pool for money. Was underneath the restaurant on Dale and Selby.
So,
I had 3 jobs as a kid
Yeah.
on different places on Selby Avenue.
so the tunnel would have gone, I don't have when it was sealed. Oh, actually, we can guess it because the dates of the trolley. Oh, yeah, I've got that slide somewhere.
Hey, Ted,
Sir,
how long that 7th Street retirement home been in practice?
say that again.
7 Hills.
Oh, is that the one that we just, I was showing you about the, Carl
What's the history now?
has history of that. I can't tell you right offhand, but it's less than 10 years. Yeah.
I've interviewed over there.
Oh, okay.
What's the apartment?
Well, actually, here, I do have an answer to the tunnel question. And I forgot that I had these. I printed some out for everyone. There are 10 people here, right? When it went to an electric car in 1891, they dug a tunnel for that. So that's when the tunnel would have occurred. Here, let me give.
Steep, wasn't it?
The tunnel, well, it was fairly steep. It was about, whatever the grade is of Grand Avenue, when it bows and goes down, whatever that percent is, a 5% grade, something like that. That's what that tunnel is. And so the tunnel starts about, we'll say 100 yards from Summit Avenue down the hill. And then it ends, it comes out, and that's what I was looking for. I have a photograph, a drawing of the trolley emerging from the tunnel. And it comes out past the cathedral by probably one full building. So I would say you've got about 200 yards of breadth of the tunnel itself. And so when it was closed, what they did, of course, on Selby Avenue side, they filled it and made it solid. And then on the downhill side, they came in and just put a seal over the door. And I know you'll be shocked to hear this, but there were young people in St. Paul at the time who managed to open that, and that was their secret cave. And there were accidents that occurred in the secret cave.
It was just the trolleys, wasn't any other traffic?
Bigger pardon? No. Just, but it was two lanes, two directions. So here I'm going to. There's 2 sheets. Several of you are here in. I could give these to Dave. He knows how to hand things out. All right. So what I did here, I'm going to take out 2 itself. Thank you.
At your service as always.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so now Ted has to get back into frame. So there are 2 pictures. One is the one we started with, which identifies a historic hill district. The yellow line, the green is Summit Avenue. The yellow line is Grand, which the 2 of them working in concert really supercharged the development of a historic hill district. At that time, early in the 70s, the northern section was bleeding, and it was some people were investing, but when they would finish a project and the developers would come in and do a project, they would have a hard time getting their money out because the resale values just weren't there. And so in part, my goal with stabilizing, getting Selby energized is that it would change the character. I felt it would change the character and it would change the conversation, as opposed to all of the conversations of hand-wringing. Woe is me. Except for my bad foot, I would be an Olympic star. Get over it, guys. You're never going to be, anyway, that part. So but it also gave a chance for more people to get involved. And fortunately, a lot of the successful businesses on Selby, especially between Dale and Lexington, were African American owned and developed. And so it was because of that slower process, more people were able to get involved. So I feel, my contributions were not architectural, but just basically listening to many sides and helping people plug in and be part of the change. And so that was that arc. And then the other thing, which I think is it's a great story, is the history of Selby as a public transit. There's no other street in the metropolitan area that had a cable car. And no other street that had that range of things, I think, occurring to it. And some people will ask, if, in fact, Interstate 94 went somewhere else, and there was a lot of people in the Hill District that were pushing hard to have the interstate go where the rail lines are north of University. You know how a lot of that's warehouse district now that's fallen on disrepair, now coming back as warehouse art studios or other things. But that was one of the there was a lot of energy for that. And in fact, some of the people that worked very actively with us in preservation had lost those battles and were still a little angry about it. Had that happened, there would have been some housing dislocation, but the very strong community, low income, but still strong as an environment, Rondo neighborhood would have remained. But that's another battle lost. Yes.
I just have a 1976, the year of the bicentennial.
Okay.
And I was in Atlantic City for the National Nurses Convention, and I found out I got a job with Ramsey County Public Health. So my first office was at the Easter Seals building on Portland and Dale, which is now a condo. But we home visited the whole Selby Dale area.
Okay.
That was my neighborhood.
Okay.
76.
Just driving around, Grand Ave is losing a little bit of its luster, and then we drive up in Selby, and Selby looks like things are happening. And I said to my wife, Selby looks like the new Grand. Is there that shift? Because I assume property values are a little more affordable in Selby, right?
I don't know about the crop. What I do know, and this was, I had prepared this talk and a while back, and was talking with a friend who's a landscape architect, very successful, who works has a lot of large clients, but he does a lot of residential work, and he works metro-wide. He's and Bob's last name I cannot think of. I apologize right now. But however, I was mentioning my delight in discovering on the list, there was a newspaper article, I'm not sure it was St. Paul or Minneapolis, of the top 8, what do they call that? Garden, outdoor patio dining. The top 8 in the metro area. 4 of them were on Selby Avenue. So I said, I saw Bob, I just saw this article. It's crazy. He said, well, Ted, my clients are metro-wide. I'm doing work on all this. And if they ask me, I tell them the single best street in the Twin Cities is Selby. And I was shocked. But he said, and it was because of he says it's a vibrant dining community. And for some reason, and it has to do just with ancient land use parcels, a lot of these restaurants in the older buildings have quirky spaces that you can't park cars in or whatever, and you would never build them that way because whatever. Anyway, and so that's what's happened there. And he said it just, for him, he said that's his location of choice. So
Ted, I realize you could talk for another minute or two, but it's after 1:30, and I wanted to thank you very much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And we look forward to your next TED Talk here. So
okay.
If you'll stay for a little bit, I'll ask Ted to stay for questions. Thanks everybody for coming today. We have leftover pizza if there are any customers. The price is very reasonable. It's free. And again, many thanks. And again, it's good to see you again, and I appreciate it very much.
There is one last point to make.
Except for...
No, that's it. I get the final word. No, and it's an aha moment for me. I found myself wondering, well, yeah, I could see this as, and it happened just like that. Wrote the books, bang, everything changed. 50 years since those books were written. And so I think I'm not that old. My wife looks at me and says, no, Ted, you're much older. So anyway, that's it. Now, are there any more thoughts or questions? I'd love to hear other people. I love these experiences.
We'll take it from there.
I've got a story.
Oh, good.
You're not broadcasting now. Don't worry. The broadcasting is over.
Well, here, come right here in the section here. You talk and it'll be picked up in my mic.
Well,
here, come over.
So, historically in the Twin Cities, you can remember when downtown Minneapolis, the Northwestern Bank had a big fire and it burned, and they cleared it out. Well, one of my wife's best friends, they were nursing students at St. Olaf together. She married a guy a couple of years ahead of us at St. Olaf, and he was an entrepreneur. And he and a buddy went down to Northwestern Bank, and they said, what are you going to do some of the stuff inside. The walls were white marble walls in the open spaces of that bank. And they were able to buy it for a song. They got a semi, and they filled that semi with these sheets of white marble. And they went looking for somebody that might be interested, and they got in touch with some guys that were developing the corner of Selby and Western into what would be Frost and Company. And they bought all of that white marble, they cut it up and made tabletops out of it, and if you go to eat at Frost and Company today, you're still eating on the white marble from the walls at the old Northwestern Bank in Minneapolis.
Here, here.
And I mentioned that when we go there, my wife and I go there, we first went soon after we heard that story, and they hadn't been open more than about a year. And we'll mention it to the wait staff, and they say, really? You know, they can't believe the story. But anyway, I thought that's an interesting connection